Hey guys, my name is Mark and welcome back to Mechanic Mondays. If you weren't already aware, we do this every Monday and I'm live on chats on the website for any troubleshooting issues that you guys are having or any concerns from 1 to 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Anyways, let's get to it. So for today's Mechanic Mondays, I wanted to kind of get into in detail when troubleshooting specifically the Babymaker. We're getting a lot of questions on how to troubleshoot when this is happening, when that is happening, etc., etc. So the first thing I want to cover is when your battery isn't taking a charge. So that is going to involve your battery, the charge port, and your charger. So the first thing that you want to check for is the voltage that's being outputted from the charger. Do keep in mind you will need a multimeter for this. Looking at the charge port, the pins on the flat side is your positive and negative terminals, and you want to make sure that the charger outputs about 43 volts. If so, then we can assume for now that your charger is good to go. The next thing you want to check for is the charge port. Now this is located on the top tube of the Babymaker. You will need to test the charge port with the multimeter as well. If you get any reading from the charge port, we can assume that the charge port is also fine as well. And then the next thing to check for is the battery. So we do have a separate video that my associate Jason has done in regards to removing the battery and controller from the frame. The battery specifically is located on the down tube. And when removing it, you will need to drop the fork and remove the bottle cage bolts to successfully remove it, as well as all your internal connections as well. And either port from the battery to check for is completely fine. At full charge, the battery should report roughly 41, 42 volts. Anything less than that, as long as it doesn't go under 33 volts, you're fine. If it is under 33 volts, you may have an issue with your battery. But other than that, it's gonna be one of those three things. So like I said, check output of the charger, anywhere between 42 to 43 volts. You want to check the charge port located closer to the head tube. Any reading from the charge port will indicate that the port is completely fine. And then the next thing to check for is the battery. So the battery at full charge, again, should be about 41, 42 volts. Anything less than that at full charge may indicate a failing cell in the battery. If it is below 33 volts, that means cutoff has been reached and the BMS has been triggered. So the battery will not take a charge at all. So if that's the case, be sure to hit us up and we'll be able to take care of you. So the next thing I want to go over is power failure with the display. So it's either going to have to do with the battery, the display, or the controller. Above all else, the first thing that you want to look for is to ensure that the connections are good to go. So you want to make sure the connection from the display to the controller, which is located inside the head tube of the frame, is good. And if that works out and your display still doesn't want to power up, the next thing you want to do is check all your internal connections. As previously stated before, my associate Jason has a video up that it is the removal of the battery and controller, and also goes through all the connections that you need to know about and what to look for if they're damaged in any way. If checking the connections, it's still not working out, the next thing you want to do is test the voltage from the battery. To get the most accurate reading, you want to remove the battery from the frame and test it with the multimeter directly. And as I mentioned before, it's going to be either of the ports. At full charge, again, the battery should stay around 41 or 42 volts. If anything under 33 volts, there's going to be a problem. But if your battery checks out, then go ahead and contact us at support@flx.bike. Let us know what's going on. And the first thing that we'll be sending you is a display. If that doesn't work, then a controller. All right, so the next thing I want to cover is intermittent power with the display. So this is entirely different from complete power loss. So a lot of the time, intermittent power will throw an error code 26. And what that means is the battery is too low for what you are trying to do. So as an example, you're trying to climb a steep hill, you got maybe 2 bars left and you're in pedal assist mode 5, the battery doesn't have enough juice to get you up that hill, so it throws an error 26. So that could be related to intermittent power, as when error 26 pops up, your display turns off after a short while, maybe 3 or 4 times the error 26 code will flash on the display and then it will just suddenly power off. Another thing is you may have a failing cell in the battery. So one thing to check for is full charge. So whatever the battery is at full charge, it should be, again, anywhere between 41 or 42 volts. If not, there may be an issue. If so, and you're still experiencing intermittent power and you know 100% sure that it's not an error 26, it may be still the battery. You would have to remove the battery from the frame and take it to an electrical shop to get it load tested. And what they do is that the load test, or the device that they use, will put a constant load on the battery. And as the voltage drains, if it suddenly drops all of a sudden at any given point, then we know for sure that there is a failing cell in the battery. You want to let us know about that. Send us the battery so we can inspect it ourselves. And if you're within warranty, we'll go ahead and replace it for you. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is intermittent or complete loss of your pedal assist. So this is completely disregarding your display. So as an example, you're on a ride and then your assist doesn't kick in, or it kind of goes on and off, but your display remains on. This is going to have to do with either the cadence sensor, the magnets on the crankset, both of them, or it will have to do with the parameters on the display. So the easiest thing to check for is the parameters on the display. We have an entirely different video on that, on what needs to be on the display, all the correct settings as well. I forgot to mention, but what also could be causing the problem is the motor, typically a loose connection. If all the parameters on the display check out, one thing that I suggest doing is engaging walk assist on the display. So when the display turns on, give it a second, and then press and hold down the down arrow, and you should see a person with a bike on the display, and the motor should kick in about roughly 5 miles per hour. If that checks in, then we know for sure that the motor is fine. Just, if I were you, I would also hold it down just for a little longer, just to be sure that it maintains that consistent 5 or so miles per hour. But if that checks out, then we can single out the display and the motor, and we can turn our attention to the cadence sensor and the magnets. So these guys are located towards the bottom portion of the bike, specifically towards an area called the bottom, or a component called the bottom bracket. So that's the bottom portion of the bike, and the sensor has a red LED on it. So with the display, excuse me, with the display powered on, moving your cranks forward, the red LED should be blinking depending on how fast you're moving the cranks forward. So if you're really spinning those cranks, that red LED should flash quite fast. If it doesn't flash at all, either the connection from the sensor to the controller is not secure, or the sensor itself is defective. And I'm sorry, I forgot to mention one more thing, and if that's not the, and before assuming it's defective, sorry, you need to make sure that the space between the disc, so this disc right here has quite a few magnets, and this is how the bike detects that you're moving the crankset. Let's see if I can kind of get this right. I hope you guys can see this. So as you rotate your cranks, the magnets will pass through the sensor, and this will determine that you're pedaling, and the bike or the motor should start assisting you. So if the gap is too big, there's a problem. So you want to kind of close that gap. The magnets are mounted onto the spindle of the crankset or the bottom bracket, depending if you have a standard or a pro, and it kind of stays in place using friction. The entire disc is kind of just plastic, and it's pressed onto the spindle. You want to make sure that that it is as close to the sensor as possible without actually hitting it, and that the disc does not move independent from the cranks. If everything checks out there, then you will need to check the connection from the sensor to the controller, and there's two of them. Between the two, there's an extension cable. So the connection closest to the sensor a lot of the time is actually on the outside of the frame. If not, you should be able to kind of fish it out. If that's not the case, you will have to drop your fork, get into the head tube of the frame, remove the battery, and check the two connections from there. If everything checks out, the connections, the gap between the disc and the sensor, and the LED is still not powering up, get in contact with us. We'll get you situated with a replacement sensor. Other than that, that's everything that I wanted to cover. That's everything I wanted to cover today for troubleshooting regarding the Babymaker. My name is Mark. I'm one of the mechanic or bike technicians here for FLX. So if you have any more questions or concerns, feel free to email us at support@flx.bike. Thank you.